Good evening, everyone. The state's forest peace deal is on the verge of flatlining, with a key player refusing to resume its seat at the negotiating table. The Forest Industries Association says the demands of environment groups are unrealistic, with time running out to reach an agreement.
As smoke from a regeneration burn engulfed the Huon Valley, it wasn't the only dark cloud to envelop our troubled forests. The Forest Industry Association today questioning the viability of the IGA reform process.
I'm reluctant to call it dead. I think it's a very, very faint pulse at the moment.
Terry Edwards rejecting a proposed one-month ceasefire from environment groups as tokenism, labelling the conditions unreasonable.
Including the increase in their demanded area of moratorium, increasing from 430,000 hectares to 572,000 hectares.
We think it's entirely reasonable that you don't log the places that you're talking about protecting until you've decided whether or not you're going to protect them.
The state needs an outcome soon, so legislation can be introduced by the end of June to qualify for federal funding.
We call on FAIR to come back to the table. We call on the environmental groups to stop protesting. If that can occur, we can get a resolution.
We do still expect the government to consider the offer and the implementation of a proper moratorium.
Right in the middle of the proposed high conservation value area was this Forestry Tasmania regeneration burn, with smoke affecting nearby communities.
It affects our eyes, makes for allergies and difficult breathing.
The smoke was sheared off by some upper level winds and carried across and actually dumped into parts of the Huon Valley.
How many mistakes are we going to have to wear in the community of the Huon Valley before these such regeneration burns actually are brought to an end?
Forestry Tasmania issuing an apology to those affected. Matt Mansfield, Southern Cross News.
Tasmania's forest peace deal may well be doomed. The Forest Industries Association is critical of the process, but today has refused to return to the negotiating table. Here's state political reporter Brad Markham.
It's another blow for Tasmania's fragile forest peace talks.
I'm reluctant to call it dead. While there's life, there's hope.
But any hope of a deal is quickly slipping away. Terry Edwards has announced the Forest Industries Association won't be returning to the table.
I will not negotiate under duress, and I never have and I never will.
It's rejected an olive branch from environment groups who've offered to suspend market campaigns in Japan, but only on the condition logging stops in contentious areas of native forest.
If we accepted this offer, half the sawmills in the state would close almost immediately.
Neither side is willing to budge. The Forest Industries Association wants an end to protests which cost jobs and endanger Tasmanian workers.
I think FAIR just want us to pack up and go away, and that's just not going to happen.
Environment groups want forest earmarked for protection from logging spared from this. They say the footage is of forests within the 572,000 hectares.
Forests that I flew over yesterday that are being logged right up to the boundaries, within 1 kilometre of the boundary of World Heritage Forests.
The standoff is holding up the peace talks.
The other signatories have not met in the absence of FAIR, other than 2 informal meetings.
And a final deal isn't possible without it. The state government is refusing to break the deadlock by forcing Forestry Tasmania to cease logging in the area. It says the state-owned company has wood supply contracts which must be met. Forestry Tasmania is being investigated by the world's largest forest certification organisation. PEFC International is probing claims it's harvesting native forests at double the sustainable yield.
We have to take it very seriously because certification is very important to markets.
Forestry Tasmania is confident it'll be cleared by the investigation. Brad Markham, ABC News.
But today their offer to cease market campaigns in exchange for a moratorium was rejected.
It is a token effort by Markets for Change and others to try and show willing to cease their campaigns, and yet since the date they made that offer, they have considerably escalated their campaign in Japan.
But the buck doesn't stop there. Environmental groups say the Premier has the ultimate say, and they're urging her to force Forestry Tasmania to accept the moratorium deal.
We have made a formal offer to the government and we're waiting on their response. It's the government that's able to decide whether the moratorium will be applied.
But the government says the demand for a full moratorium over 572,000 hectares is not a negotiation. And with legally binding contracts in place, it cannot force Forestry Tasmania to agree to the moratorium. Meanwhile, there are concerns signatories will not meet their mid-April deadline. With Fiat refusing to engage and environmentalists continuing their campaigns, it's getting harder to see how the negotiations can be fruitful. Signatories can technically go ahead, but without industry's peak body, it will be a hard task getting legislation through Parliament.
I suspect its chances of passage through the Tasmanian Legislative Council would be very, very small, if not non-existent.
Meanwhile, Forestry Tasmania is under formal investigation. An inquiry has been launched following claims the government department is over-harvesting. Forestry Tasmania says past audits show it's managing forests sustainably. Clementine Johnson.